long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. been walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. The haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? along like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. been walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power.
Hey folks, welcome back for what are we up to? The third final session now. So we're going to be covering an intro to scripting today. For any of you that don't know me, and this may be your first session, my name's Chris Murphy. I handle evangelism in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. My role is kind of to support developers, and I've been brought in to kind of help train folks for this short film challenge. So stepping through a whole lot of content. Now on the line, aside from myself, we have Alex Stevens, who's an engineer. So he's an evangelist as well, but he has an engineering background. So he knows a lot more of the programming side of things, the deeper side of things, while I'm kind of more of a tools person. So we have different specialties, but hopefully between the two of us, we can generally give you advice for what to do and why to do it for this whole session. Now, for today, we're going to be looking at an intro to scripting, and we're going to work on two parts of it. The first part is I would like to run people through just the basics of setting up a scene that is playable. And I know some of you might be like, we're making films, why do we want to have something that's playable? And I totally understand the questioning on that one. But because of how the engine is set up, you can actually use stuff that's playable and record it, and you can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. For instance, if you want to have a flock of animals or something, like a flock of sheep or something in the background, it might actually be easier to temporarily be this sheep, move throughout the world, record where they go, cache their positions and animations accordingly, and then move on with your life because of it. So that would generally be positive for a positive skill transfer from a real time to a film kind of space. So it's kind of a strange one. The other person on the line with me is Tony Reed. So Tony is the territory manager for Australia and New Zealand. So this entire project is his brainchild. And if you have any questions about whether something is going to be acceptable and whether something is the intent of the project, etc., he's hopefully going to be able to answer all of those challenge related inquiries that some of you may have. So, without further ado, let's start stepping into the intro to scripting. So, here we go. Now, when it comes to this environment, I'm using a thing called the stylized environment. It's one that's just floating around on the Learn tab. It's completely free, so you can open up this one yourself and you can get things going. What I would really love to do, though, is I would love to set up a couple of things. Now, the first of these is actually going to be outside of this stylized kingdom. So the first of these that I want to show you to hopefully give folks a slightly better understanding of how some things work is I'm actually going to create a new level. I'm going to come back to this, don't stress, but I'm going to create a new level just for a moment that has kind of the bare bones essentials in here, okay? And if you were to look at an environment, like a default environment like this, and you consider what we have in the scene, I'm gonna kind of add the elements one by one so we can really understand them. But if you were to look at a scene, like a standard empty scene, we're gonna need some sort of directional light, which represents the sun, okay? And you would generally also need some sort of like sky atmosphere or something along those lines to have some sort of horizon. So I'm going to select my sun, and I'm going to tell it that you are the sun. And we've now got this going on. Okay, just a basic time of day system. Now, if I was to get these elements for a second, and let's say I wanted this logic to be built into a single like time of day actor that was controllable, fortunately, that's actually pretty easy to do. So for just a moment, I'm going to delete my directional light and my sky atmosphere, just get us back to here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my content browser, and I'm going to create a new blueprint. Okay. Now, a blueprint is Unreal Engine's scripting system. So blueprint is what we use for all sorts of things, from player interactions to kind of advanced behaviors for certain things. I've had a question coming up asking from Ali, is there a downloadable version of the PDF seminar overview with links to past webinars? It's currently not downloadable. We made it not downloadable to avoid confusion for anyone that was opening up that document. But I can't see any reason we couldn't set it to be downloadable after the final session has gone through and we've kind of got the last of the information in there. Tony, you're welcome to chime in on that one, but I would assume that would be the best way to do it. That way we don't awkwardly get some people downloading the PDF if they're coming in for the first time and thinking they've got info that they're still missing sessions and such. That's my sneaky suspicion as to how that would be best handled. So within this system, we're creating something reasonably simple. I want to create an actor. Now, an actor refers to something that is placeable in the world. Okay, so if I'm putting something in the world, it's going to be an actor. And you can have different types of actors. Okay, so I'm going to go actor and go BP time of day. That's what I'm just going to call it. And you'll see that when I open this up, what I actually have is I have the ability to kind of add various components to it. So while the viewport is representing the viewport is up here, it's representing what we have in the blueprint currently. So that allows me to just add things to it. And I'm going to add a component. So let's say we wanted to add the directional light. I could click here and I could say add directional light. And in the same way that I set that on my actor in the world, I could set it, set the sun property on this directional light component here. Now, on top of that, if I wanted to, I could also go ahead and do the exact same thing as before and, add a sky atmosphere. In this situation, I'd really love it if the directional light had like a big arrow attached to it so I could see which direction it was facing. So you can see that that's there. I'm going to rename my directional light to sun. And I'm going to set the arrow to be a bright orange, yellowy looking thing. Great. Now, if I was to get something like this, and you know, it's still pretty simple at the moment, but if I was to get something like this, and I was to add this to my world, you'll see that it's now adding both of those bits of pieces at the same time. Okay, now, all right, that's kind of useful, but here's where things start to get interesting, and that is that if we wanted to, we can add logic to this. And what I mean by that is if we open up our time of day and we look at this, if I go over to my event graph gives me the capacity to add logic to the blueprints that we see. So what I mean by that is in the engine, we have a concept known as ticking. And that is that every single time the real-time world goes to update, it ticks. So if you were to imagine that I was throwing, for instance, this remote across the room, as this went through the air, every single time the engine updates, what it would be doing is saying, all right, where was I the previous frame? How fast am I moving? And how long has it been since we rendered the previous frame? Okay. So what this means is it would multiply its speed against the time and add it to its previous location, which would move it along. So every tick is going to follow some kind of basic logic like that. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because that lets us kind of have some simple logic for setting things up. So I've had a question come up. Given that almost everything in UE is user variable driven, can you change the sun color to anything? Yeah, you actually can. So a cool part of the sky atmosphere is if you wanted to represent, there are two ways to do this. You've got the scientific way, which is actually setting various variables for how light absorption works in the atmosphere or Rayleigh scattering or anything like that, which is great to actually physically simulate like Mars or something. But you've also just got art direction, which allows you to override certain variables. So you can kind of change your lumens factor, you can change various color settings, etc., etc. So if you wanted to change some of those properties, you can do so in the details panel of both the sky atmosphere and the sun itself. Now, what I was going to do here in tick is I was going to say to it, every single time you tick, I want to add local rotation to my sun, which means it's going to add some rotation to the sun that we have. And I could do that backwards, okay? So if I wanted to do it the other way, I could drag my sun in and I could say add rotation. Or if I was trying to work out what I knew it had something to do with rotation, I could be like rotate, what have we got? Oh, this is the right one. You know what I mean? So it is context sensitive. So if you drag off of something, it'll be like, here are the options available to that. So here you can see that we have delta rotation, and delta rotation is the change in rotation, which is fortunately pretty straightforward. I only want to change the pitch because I want my sun to kind of go end over end over end. And the time that I mentioned earlier, which is the time since the last time we rendered anything in the scene, is the delta time. So by multiplying this by, say, I don't know, 10, we're now going to move 10 degrees per second. In closing, what we get is, if I was to put my sun here and hit go, you can see that we've actually just created a dynamic time of day. And if I was to move this way, give it a minute. I may have made my sun go for slightly too long, but that's okay. Any second now. Go. We can now get this working. And the cool part is if I was to look at my blueprint while it was running, it actually shows me the logic that's currently executing here. See that red line that's kind of coming across? It's actually telling it to keep adding local rotation. And I can hold my mouse above it and see the last values that were added to it, which is just really, really powerful to kind of suss some of these things out. So, all right, that's useful, and we can see some advantages there, but we could do some other things too, right? Like we could go ahead and we could say to it, let's get the current, let's change this to be variable. So let's make it so that the sun can rotate at different speeds. So if I was to get this times by 10 and promote this to a variable, I can now call this sun speed. And you'll see that it's listed over here. But a really cool thing is that if you check this little box here, this eyeball, the time of day blueprint now has sun speed as an option. And what that lets me do is say, hey, let's make the sun speed 40. At which point we get a much faster spinning environment. See? Or if I wanted to go at a glacial pace, I could do 0.1. Okay, so, and if I wanted to go real life, I could do, what's that, 24, 360 divided by 24 times 60 times 60. So, you know, we could actually have this kind of physically simulating things too. So, as I said, you know, setting up something like this is my first step for kind of just showing folks the logic of where Blueprint comes in. Now, it is worth noting, and this might actually be really valuable for some of the people in the session, but if you go to your plugins menu and you do a search for sun position calculator, Sun Position Calculator actually sets all of this up for you, and a cool thing is that it does is it lets you set the date, the time, the longitude, and the latitude, and it will actually put the sun in the correct position. This is really, really useful if you're ever using Unreal Engine for virtual scouting. Like if you know you're going to be on location 6 weeks from now, you can actually see where the sun's coming up from and where it's setting, and you can calculate what your, you know, outside of weather, obviously, but you can calculate what your rough lighting conditions or your optimal lighting conditions would look like on that day. But as well as that, you know, I mean, if I'm setting a film in Australia, for instance, maybe that's a nice way of kind of getting some landmarks and such kind of lined up with certain things. It's up to you. But I just wanted folks to know that this was available, and apparently it's pretty cool. I've only ever used it once or twice myself, but it gets a lot of use from ArcViz people especially. So we've got that put in place, and it's time for us to go back to the stylized rendering environment that we had before to continue with the scene. So we have something basic, and what I would like to do is we can see this fence running along the scene. You know, we can see this mesh is being used over and over and over again. But let's say that instead of putting this fence down manually, we wanted to put this fence down as like a nice, easy spline that we just kind of dropped into place. A cool thing is that we can actually do that in Unreal. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to teach construction scripts by going to my blueprint, creating an actor, and calling this fence tool. I'm going to add BP at the start just so it's easy to find. Now, just before I go into this, I really want to stress that if anyone has any questions, like the whole reason we're doing these sessions live is because we wanted folks to be able to hit us up and say, hey, how does this work? Or why would you do that instead? Or any questions like that, you know? So we wanted to make this live so that we could really add proper value to this and make it more training than tutorial. So if you do have any questions, please... Please feel free to jump in there, and we have Alex and Tony both in the chat, so they're able to answer any questions that you may have. So I've created this BP fence tool, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to add a spline. Now, if you're unfamiliar with them, splines represent lines that go through 3D space, and you can see this pretty clearly. If I was to drop this into the world, you can see that this has a like a line that's coming out of it, and if you alt drag, you can then kind of add more of those, and I kind of see that white line going through space. Okay, now what I would really love is for a fence to kind of follow that whole situation. So I mean, how would I go about doing that? Yeah, sorry, my mistake. OH&S issue again. I'll move the fence to the side. So as you can see, you know, we're able to kind of set this up, and we can position this to however we need it to be. But what I would really love to do is I would love to have a mesh that was kind of actually following this line. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we can actually go into a blueprint and we can look at the construction script. Now, the event graph represents all of the stuff that happens while the world is simulating. But the construction script represents what happens when something is put into the world for the first time. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we can do some pretty cool stuff with the construction script. For instance, if I wanted to, I could add a mesh of some sort. Let's add a fence mesh. I could add that fence mesh in the construction script. So even though it's not added here, when I hit compile, you can now see that it's added this fence mesh. But a cooler thing that I can do is I can look at the spline and I could say get the location at a certain spline point. So I could say I want you to get the location of the first spline point. And if we look here and I hit compile, notice this is lined up with this point here. That's because technically this point is point 0 and this point is point 1. So, you know, I can start to do a little bit of logic here. But I could add these, and a cool thing that I could do is I could actually tell it to add one of these for every single point that we have. And what I mean by that is I could say to the spline, I could say to it, hey, how many points do you have? So get the number of spline points. And I could actually say, I want to do something. Oops. I want to do something that many times. Now you may remember that I said that the first point is 0, which means if there's 10 points, the last point is point number 9. Because instead of counting from 1, we count from 0. Yeah, it's a programming thing. But if I wanted to do that... Oops, sorry, I missed. I want to tell it to add it to the current point that we're counting to. You can now see that it's added one of these fences to every single point along the spline. And again, like I can push this same logic like a little bit further each time. Because now that I can see that it's adding it to that, what if we, instead of adding a static mesh, we added a spline mesh? And I'm going to tell it that, actually, I'm going to keep that the same. I'm going to tell it that its start and end is the current position that we're looking at. And I want its end position and end tangent to be the next position. So if we were to do that, we would need to tell it, hey, get the current position, but add 1 to it. I have clearly missed something. Add spline mesh component, set start and end. I have, oh, I forgot to set the fence as the mesh. That was a good trick. I was like, why is this not working? My logic is fine. So we can see here, it's stretching from there to there. There is a mistake in what I just did, but that's okay. And again, we can see here that it's stretching this fence along the length of this mesh. We're getting this weird bend at the end. We're getting that weird bend because there is no if we're counting all the way to the end, we actually want to only connect the second last piece to the last piece, because there's no such thing as the last piece plus 1, because that would be, it's just a thing that doesn't exist. So instead of minusing 1, I need to minus 2 here. And you can see here that we're now able to kind of work with that. And the great aspect of this is, you know, if we're building a scene and we're working on a scene and you're looking at it and you're loving it, we can then just quickly and easily iterate on that and kind of pull this out to here or wherever we need to kind of really easily have artist tools that are appropriate to the kind of scenes that you know that are built here. And I personally think it's really lovely. By the way, a little thing that's useful is if you press end, it will drop whatever you've got selected to the ground, which is really useful because, in a situation like this, if I want to get this spline point and be like, no, you're at ground level, it'll just go ahead and do that for me, which is great for just lining things up a little bit. So fencing off the water so actors don't drown. Exactly. See, now I'm pro OH&S. Because we could run this all the way to here. Once they reach the pier, they're on their own. So we've got this going on, and I bring this up. Someone's asked, is the stylized environment mainly a matter of using the stylized type of texture and material? I mean, yeah, there's a few things that's going on in this environment. If I was to look at this as purely color, you can see that it's pretty flat colors for the most part. There's a couple of stylistic choices in terms of getting kind of this masking looking. But not only that is, there's some other artistic choices like making the clouds 3D objects like that helps a lot. And then finally, we're running post-process on the scene, which is what gives us the outlines in the scene. So, and that's pretty easy to do. It's actually something that I've decided to add to this upcoming technical art talk tomorrow. So you may want to, if you want to see how to do outlines, I can either show you there or I can, Alex might be able to link to some of the docs. But basically, we're able to kind of create outlines around things dynamically. So you can take a more stylized approach to your situation. If I was to turn the post-processing off, this world would look like this. So this is what it looks like when you just bring in those assets. There's a couple of things like these assets actually have the outlines painted into them. And then when I turn them on, you can see that it's being color graded and that we're adding the outlines to things like these trees, which kind of really helps give that that toon look. And if you wanted to, nothing would stop you from pulling that camera back and doing a much flatter type of look to things. And I've seen people do some pretty cool stuff. Like I've seen people do in-engine like tilt shift photography equivalents and things like that. So you can set up some kind of cool environments to make things feel stylized. I mean, you could set this up to feel like a non-copyright version of Lego or something along those lines pretty easily. Or you could have something in a way more cartoony style. Like I drift towards the realistic looks just because that's where my background is personally, but it's also why I wanted to try and use stylized for at least one of these sessions so folks could see that you can still do some other pretty cool stuff. Cool. So with that done, the next thing is we've now got the ability to kind of just drop in a fence, and this is now our fence tool. That's the coolest part is at any point if I ever want a fence, I can just drop this thing in and I can say, hey, I want to run this fence from here to wherever I need it to run to. Go to that point, and I can stretch it however far I need to. So I can, having this as a tool, it wouldn't be difficult at all for me to also add like a post. I'm not sure if there is actually a fence post mesh for me to play on. But if I wanted to, yeah, there's not one at the moment, but let's pretend this dock pillar is close enough to a fence post. If I wanted to, I could also say, hey, for that very first thing, I want to add a static mesh component, which will be the pillar. Oops, okay, I'm gonna have to offset that a little bit. And I'm gonna tell the pillar to be, say, I don't know, 1.5 meters off the ground. That was still excessive, but now if I was to go back to this, you can see that the 0 node of any of these is kind of going to be placed there. 150 was excessive, clearly, but that's okay. It was kind of just more for the sake of demonstration. So as I said, I kind of wanted to be able to just handle some of these things, create some really simple tools, because the truth is like an artist that's capable of just whipping up tools that are appropriate to them is an incredibly powerful artist. Like when you're able to say, this is what I need, and even if you do a version that would, for all intents and purposes, make a programmer cry, that's fine. Sorry, Alex, but that's fine because you're able to get your job done. And quite often you can shave hours, weeks, months out of a project depending on the kind of tool that you needed. And that's why one of the things that we're doing later on, which is focusing on how to build your own editor tools, is going to be really, really powerful. So that's going to be the section that Alex is doing a little later on. The question came up of, can you make them straight? You can tell them to be linear. So you can see that when I made this point linear, it fully straightened out that specific point from there. If the tangent's too long, it will still bend it, but it's up to you. So again, like linear, but it all depends on the size of the tangents that were attached to it as well, and whether they're technically still affecting it or not. So a bit of a UI question: when I click and drag a number attribute, the speed at which it changes is a bit fast. Is there an option key that can scale that speed? So the question there is about changing, like if you click on something and you drag left and right, it will change that variable. I'm actually not sure if there's a... Oh yes, there is actually. If you're declaring a variable, like let's say, if I have a variable that we've added that is like a float, if I click, okay, sorry, if I, oh, maybe you can't do it for these. I thought you could. Oh, you can. It just can't do it on local variables apparently. But if you click here, you can actually tell the slider range and the max value range. So if I tell the slider range that it's between 0 and 10, and I tell the value range that it's between 0 and 20, and I went to slide this, it's only going to slide up to 10 and down to 0. However, if I manually typed in 15, that's still acceptable. But if I manually typed in 25, it'd just be like, nah, and set it back. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. You've just got to just do it in the variable settings over here. And again, like some of these things I could have done here is I could have made that initial transform a variable, right? I could have had this post offset, and I could have, it's fine, and I could have made that public. And what that would actually let me do is when I click here, I can now see I have a post offset, and I could say, hey, I want you to be 50, which apparently was the right value this whole time. Cool. Okay, so that's it for the core, just how to drop in construction scripts and just give you a rough idea of what Blueprint even is. But what I would love to do from here is I would love to add a character into the world with just some really basic AI. So I want to have something that's reasonably clean, nothing too fancy, but I want a character that can kind of run around and just do some of the basics. Okay. Now, for me to kind of do that, I need to create a slightly different type of blueprint. By the way, since I feel like people are actually judging my OH&S setup now, I'm kind of like, all right, this has to actually be accurate or else. Okay, so if I wanted to, I'm gonna have to create something a little bit different, and that is this time around, I'm gonna go Content Browser, and I'm gonna right-click and create a new blueprint once again. However, instead of creating an actor, I'm gonna create what's called a character. Now, I'm gonna have to explain a little bit of Unreal Engine's gameplay framework that we have that's set up, and that is if everything that can be placed in the world is an actor, you also have something that is called a pawn. Okay, now we have pawns and controllers. A pawn represents anything that can be put in the world that can be possessed and receive some sort of input. So if you could like drive a vehicle is going to be a pawn. If you can be a human being that's running around, they're going to be a pawn as well. And a pawn is just a type of actor with all of that extra stuff kind of put into it, So it's like a regular actor, but then they said, let's add all of the input logic to this thing. Now, I bring this up because there's also a thing called a character. And a character is a type of pawn, okay? And a character represents it's kind of all of the base logic that a human being would need for like to put them in. So it's like a base bipedal creature is going to be kind of having them as a character. Okay, so we're going to be using this class just here. So I'm going to add a character, and I'm going to call this knight character. And you can see here that it's got a different icon to represent that. And if I double click on it, it's actually a blueprint that already has a couple of extra little components inside of it. And this is what we're going to be building on for the rest of our session. Okay, so what we're going to be building on is we're going to have a character that can kind of move around and do stuff. Now, the first step of having a character is that we need to actually have, you know, a actual character. At the moment, this is just invisible. If I was to drag this into the world, oops, sorry, I somehow clicked on my fence instead of dragging it in. There we go. If I was to drag it into the world, you can loosely see that it's just an otherwise mostly invisible, what we call a sphill, which is a cylinder with spherical ends. Cylinder. So we've got this added to the world, but I want to actually put a person inside of that sphill. Okay, so how do I put someone inside of that capsule? Well, I need to import someone. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import that asset. Give me just one moment. I'm just opening up the objects to import. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So you can see that when we're here, I'm just going to go down to a character model that I have already created called night character. So I'm going to drag and drop her into the scene. Now she doesn't have a skeleton yet, so it's going to create one for me. And you can see that when you import a skeletal mesh, it also brings in with it 3 extra things. It brings in a skeleton, which is just a list of all the bones that are in it. It brings in a physics asset, which is like simplified collision for the character. This just gets auto-generated, and if I was to hit simulate, it's used to kind of set up constraints for different parts of the body so that we can have some kind of fun stuff like that. And finally, it also brings in a material, which is just the color of the character. Okay, and we'll set that up properly a little bit later on. But for the time being, I'm going to get my character, I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to set the knight as my character. And I'm going to put her in the middle. See if I remember the numbers from the last session. Yeah, that'll do it. So we can now see that we have a character in the world. Okay, and if I was to go back to here, we can see that she's just chilling out here. She isn't particularly great for this environment just yet, but that's okay, one day. So we've got her imported. She's very cleanly set up. There's nothing else that's there apart from the mesh setting. But the next thing that I want to do is I want to actually, I'm going to quickly just give her some coloring so that I don't feel like I'm judging myself for having gray art. So I'm going to open up her character's material. I'm just going to rename it a little bit because I don't like inst being at the end. I'm going to open up her character's material. Now, this has been auto-generated. It's a completely simple material right now that just has the color gray feeding into base color. Nothing fancy by any stretch. But what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and set her up such that we have actual textures in there. Now, fortunately, to get actual textures, what I need to do is, all I need to do is just drag and drop them in. I'm going to get my diffuse map and my mask map, and my normal map and just drag these in. Now I've got these textures, and once they've been brought in, all I need to do is drag them into the material. So we've brought this in, and I'm now able to just kind of plug in these materials as we see fit. Okay, base color, normal. Now it's worth noting that my character is not a sphere. She is not a ball. So how do we resolve this? Well, if you actually have any mesh selected, so if I was to select my character here, and I was to go to my material, and I was to click this little teapot, what it's going to do is it's actually going to apply this material to whatever mesh is selected in the content browser. And you can see that here. So we've now got her very basically set up, but you may notice this extra texture, and this is a mask texture. If I take a look at this mask texture actually has some block colors for different parts of her body. Green represents hair, red represents metal, and blue represents her eyes. So one of the cool things that we could do for something like this is we could tell it that whenever something is green, we want it to change. So if the value is green in the mask, it's going to do whatever is plugged into B. If the value is not green when plugged into the mask, it's going to do whatever is plugged into A. And if we look at that, you'll notice that when I plug this in, I added a lerp just then, by the way. So you can either do a search for lerp or linear interpolate, which is the full name. You can see that it actually just set her hair to white because by default it's a value of 1. But if I was to actually add like a color parameter by holding V and left clicking, I'm going to make a thing called hair color. We could actually just set her hair to any color. We can do purple. There we go. So we can see that that's just cleanly set itself up that way. Someone said, what's the actual math function of lerp? It's a linear interpolate, so it's a linear alpha from 0 to 1. It's essentially just an alpha node, which you may be used to in other functions. There's no easing or anything like that in a default lerp. Why did it take that long to preview the material? I don't know myself. That actually took a strangely long amount of time compared to normal. Hard to know for sure what caused it. So anyway, I've got this character and I'm going to hit save. And I'm just going to go back to my knight character, who you can now see has actual hair applied, which is a bit nicer for the world. And if we look at her in the world here, you know, we can see that she's got this. Now let's pretend that we gave her a sister over here, right? So if we have two knights in the scene and we want them to look different, the most obvious thing that we would want to change is probably their hair color. So a cool thing is because this was made as a parameter, what you're able to do is in your knight, I could just say, get the mesh, set a vector parameter on its materials. I want to set the value of hair color, and I want to create a new input variable that is called hair. And the cool thing about what I just did is it only took a couple of clicks, right? But now if I look at her in the world, defaults to black, but I can click here and say, no, let's Let's set your hair up. You can be red and I don't know, something blue. You know? And again, like it's just a quick thing, but we can now just kind of override these parameters as we see fit. Another thing that we could comfortably do, which I think is really great, is we could get this same logic, and in the event graph, a really lovely thing that you can do is you can type in the word custom event, and I'm going to make this randomize hair color. And what we could do here is actually, instead of plugging in an actual value here, I'm going to type random. And I'm going to set this to what I just made. Now, the reason this is really useful is if you click on one of these and then say call in editor, this little checkbox call in editor actually makes whatever we just did a little button. I'll find it. It's going to be all the way down here somewhere. You can now see that we have a value called randomize hair color. And if I was to click that, it would actually change her color, her hair color accordingly. Okay. So, you know, if we couldn't be bothered actually really doing the hard yards on that, that would be a nice and easy way to go about it. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to have her running around the world. So I would love her to just randomly wander throughout the world. So the question is well, how do we get someone that's able to move through the world? I'm going to give myself a bit more view space now. If we want to have someone kind of running through the world, Unreal requires you to add a thing called a navmesh bounds volume. And what a navmesh bounds volume is, some reason it added all the way up here. I'm not sure what just happened. What a navmesh bounds volume is when you drag this in, that one ended up there as well. When you drag this in, if I add this to the world and I hit P, P is for paths. See, it gives me that green square. The reason it gives me that green square is because if I make this bigger, anywhere the characters can go, it's going to just kind of paint green into the world. So it actually kind of runs people around the world and figures out where they can fit. A really cool thing that I'm not going to go into is you can actually make this generate them for creatures of different sizes too. So I could actually make one for mice and for giants, and my mice will now fit in mouse holes and my giants will not. So having something like that is pretty useful to have. It's worth noting here that I forgot to actually tell my fences to have collision. To fix something like that is literally just clicking on the mesh and saying, hey, wherever your collision tab is, that's right there, block things. And you can now see that they can no longer cross the fences. Okay. So we've added this nav mesh volume to our world. So our characters now have the ability to wander around. But how do we give that logic to the character? Well, we can do that by telling her when the game begins, I want your AI to move to a location. Now it's going to say which pawn, and I'm going to say specifically myself. Now it's going to say, yeah, but where am I moving? And I'm going to say, well, I want you to have some sort of random reachable point in a radius around you. A radius around what? Around myself. Yeah, but how big is the radius? I could hard code this in, or I could even make it a parameter. Wander radius. And the cool thing is if I hit simulate, the water is still walk-onable. I forgot to fix that. But you can see here that she happily did that. She just wandered to a next location. I'll run it again. I feel like now she's just showing off. So, you know, for something like this, we can see that there's a bit of logic that's kicking in. And that, you know, she's just kind of wandering through the world. Now, if I wanted her to do that again and again, I might actually want to say, you know what? This thing, this logic that we have here is the concept of wandering. So I'm going to create a custom event that says wander. And when the game begins, I'm going to tell her to wander. Whenever she gets where she's going, I want her to chill out for a second, for like, I don't know, 2 seconds. And then I want her to wander. Not to be confused with the Cheap Trick song. So, if I was to go back to this and watch it, they really just went for it. So see how whenever they get somewhere, they're now chilling? I'm just gonna fix this now because it's killing me. But I'm gonna tell the ground that it does not have collision because I'm dying inside. No collision. FOP. I'm fine with her walking to the bottom of the ocean. I just feel like I'm being made fun of. Great. Actually, that's an incredibly shallow water, so maybe that's acceptable. Anyway, so we can see here that she's able to move around, and we've got the basic logic in place for her to kind of just have some general aimless wandering, right? So the next thing that I would like to do here is I would like her to actually be pilotable. So I would like to be in control and to be that person. Okay. Now to do that, what you need to do is you need to go to your project settings, and we need to add a couple of inputs. So I need to say to her, we're going to add what's called an axis mapping. I'm going to say I'm going to have move forward, and it's going to be bound to W on my keyboard. I'm now going to make S, and the reason for that is we have this value here called scale, and moving forward at a negative speed is moving backwards. Okay, so by saying, hey, -1 on forward, that's backwards. And we're going to do the same thing for here. I'm going to add a move right. And I'm going to bind that to D. I'm going to bind left, which is just negative right, to A. And I'm going to have look, which is my mouse Y, inverted. And I'm going to have turn, which is going to be my mouse X. So by creating these things, and I just gave them arbitrary names, the game engine's actually smart enough that if those exist somewhere, if I type in the word move forward, it actually creates this as a possible thing to have. So whenever someone presses move forward, I want them to do this thing. Specifically, I want them to add a movement input that is, by the way, to add these little reroute nodes to make things cleaner, you just double click on the node. But I want them to move forwards. So I'm going to say get my actors forward vector. And I'm just going to do the same thing for move right. Spelled correctly. Except this time, I don't want to move along my actors forward vector. I want them to move along my actors right vector. There's actually some stuff built in by default to handle turning. So if I actually say turn, I can actually say add your on a controller input. And I can say, if I want to look up and down, which I called look, I can say pitch input. Cool. So with those bits in place, I'm now able to, let's get one of these characters, let's make a third character. And let's make that character possessable. Possess means I can say, hey, I want this to automatically be auto-possess player 0. And this time when I hit play, I am this character. Now it's a bit weird because we don't have a camera set up. But for all intents and purposes, you know, we've got something that's pilotable. Okay. So let's follow that through. You know, fix a couple of things that obviously need to be fixed. I mean, the first of those things is each of these characters needs to have a camera. And one way to do it would be to add a camera just like this. The other way to do it would be to add what's called a spring arm and then stick a camera on the end of that. The reason we use spring arm is a spring arm automatically gets shorter if something gets in the way. You know, I'm going to tell it to use my pawn's control rotation, which means look where I'm looking. Cool. So we now have something that's generally pilotable. Great. So the next thing for us to fix is I would like my character to not T-pose through the world like this. Okay? So how do I go about doing that? If I want her to no longer T-pose throughout the world, it's probably, it means I need to actually set up her animations. Now we're going to set things up a little differently to how I demonstrated them in Sequencer, because I'm actually going to add some nice dynamic logic that looks at everything I'm doing and figures out the correct animations to play. So I can do that. By just dragging in these animations. You know, if I want to get her all of her idle animations and her jump animations, and I'm going to get her run animations. Oh, cancel. I know what I just Control Z'd, but I Control Z'd something. I've lost my train of thought after doing that, because I literally don't know what I just started to delete. So I've got my run, I'm going to get my idle and my relaxed and my jump, and I'm going to get my land animations. That'll do it. I might grab her falling animations just in case. I'm just going to drag them in. And when you drag them in, you say to them, hey, I want you to be paired with the skeleton. And that's all we've got. You know, we can see all these animations in play. Now, if we want to have logic that's actually driving her animations, we don't just want to plug the animation in. Because I know it, like a lot of people expect to be able to just say, hey, I want to use an animation asset, so I'm just going to plug in run. And we're just going to play that animation. And, you know, I guess that would look okay if I was doing this. But the second I stop, it's more like a dance move. It's not the desired output. So how do we fix that? Well, instead of just plugging in an animation, we need to set up a thing called an animation blueprint, which is this thing. I'm gonna say I want it based on my knight. And I'm gonna call it ABP underscore knight. Now, we're back in Blueprint. So we have two graphs, anim graph, which controls how animations blend together, and the event graph. Now, what I'm about to do is, you could, again, go ahead and just grab the run forward animation and just, you know, comfortably plug this in. But we're going to have the same problem as the one that we just did, and that is to say, if I was to plug in this animation blueprint, she's still just going to run on the spot. And if you think about what we have, we need to actually have some sort of blend space that can blend between those running anims. And that's actually pretty easy to do. If you go to animation and you create a blend space based on my knight, I'm going to call this BLS underscore locomotion. We get this. And this is really, really useful because you can actually tell it, like, horizontal represents your right movement and vertical represents your forward movement. Your furthest left speed on the graph is negative 200 and your furthest right speed is 200. Negative 200, 200. Okay. And the cool part of this is that if I got her idle animation, I can drop it in at 0, 0. So when we're not moving, that's what we're doing. And I could tell her that, you know, when we're running forwards, that's a speed of 200. And the cool thing is that depending on her speed, she's now going to play the appropriate animation to get between them. And I can do the same thing whether we're running left, running right, or running backwards. Now, if you want to do this properly, you can also add sync markers, which actually will line her feet up. So in the actual animations themselves, you can actually tell it when left foot down and right foot down is. And when the two animations merge together, if they're slightly different timings, it will try and align those animations at the correct sync point so that it doesn't look silly, you know. We can make sure that her left foot is on the ground when it blends between them. We don't get any strange temporal sliding. But you can see now that I'm actually, like, her animations are able to blend. She can just do whatever she needs to. And I think that's great. Because we can go back to our knight. And I can add this locomotion that we just created. And this now has forward and right. And the reason that's super useful with forward and right is I just now need to feed in some information that says how forward she's moving or how rightward she's moving. So to do that, I need to do it in the event graph. And again, like, my apologies here, I'm going to do a little bit of math, but a cool thing you can do is you can say, hey, get my velocity. Now, this velocity is going to be in world space. So it's actually going to be telling you how fast she's moving north, south, east, and west, and up and down. It's not going to tell you like her X, Y, and Z axes. It's not going to tell you forwards, meaning her forwards, like how far forward is she running relative to her own direction. To do that, thankfully, you just have to do a thing called an inverse transform. Inverse transforms are great because it's reasonably simple logic once you wrap your head around them, and everyone thinks you're a wizard for knowing them. So you can convince everyone that you're slightly smarter than you are. And all this logic here does is it says get my speed and then put my speed in terms of my own directions and stuff. And I'm going to promote that to a variable that I'm going to call local velocity. Okay, so my apologies if I'm breezing through this part. It's because honestly, like, once you've seen it, you can just copy and paste that into your own thing if that's how you choose to set up your animations. But with my local velocity, I can now say y-axis represents right, x-axis represents forward. And now, the fun part, when I'm chilling, she's this, and when I'm running forward, she's this. And if you actually want to, you can go into these character settings and you can set up like braking speed and acceleration, and all of this stuff is just built in out of the box, as well as like sprint speed and maximum walk speed, crouch height, and things like that. So you could actually build this out to be much bigger and allow you to blend between all sorts of other weird and wonderful stuff. And I'm nearly through my section, and I'll pass you off to Alex after me. But with this being set up, my suggestions are, if we want to change some of these movement settings, right now, she's instantaneously rotating with my look. Do you see that? As I move my mouse, she's immediately facing the new direction. And if I was to simulate the world, she will instantaneously turn there again. See that? So to fix a problem like that, all you need to do is tell her class defaults to no longer force your brain and your body to line up with where they're looking. It's called Use Controller Rotation Yaw. Now, the second you turn that on, you're going to get a different problem, which is this one. She no longer cares about turning. However, since she no longer cares about turning, you just go to your character movement. And we know this has something to do with her rotation. So I just type in rotat. And you can see that we have one here that says use controller's desired rotation. And you can even set up a thing to say how quickly she turns. Like if we want her to be a really slow turner, we can watch her. So see, we had that comfortable kind of... So now we actually have like more control going there. And the reason I wanted to show you all of this logic is because having this kind of stuff means you can do some really powerful stuff and genuinely make use of real-time tools. And what I mean by that is if I wanted these three characters to be interesting and like something that was actually in a... Not interesting. If I wanted them to be a movie and recorded and static so that, you know, I could play them in a scene. Let's say I needed 1,000 knights running around. You know, I could do it because I can go to Window, Cinematics, and now it's not listed here by default. You need to actually turn the plugin on, and I forget that every time. You need to turn on a thing called Take Recorder. I'm just going to save everything. Take Recorder will automatically... it's not automatically. It will let you record characters and it will automatically generate a sequence with all of their information. So what I mean by that is you can click on a bunch of people and say, this is where I want you to go and what I want you to like to do. And you can pilot them yourself even. And then you can play that back. And let's have a quick look at what that looks like. So I'm just restarting the editor because you need to do it whenever you enable a plugin. Under Window, Cinematics, you can now see Take Recorder is there. All-mate sequencer. I'm actually able to select the three characters and I can say add currently selected actors. I'm also going to tell it to I'm going to turn off this start at current time code. I find that isn't always great to have on if you're not on a huge movie set. Cool. So that's all set up. And if I was to hit play, but I was then to hit record, we've got these characters doing their thing. What's up? How you doing? I hit escape and it will stop. And the cool thing is if I was to review my last recording, I can actually see them, where they went and what they did. Another really cool part of this is like I actually can possess those cameras too. So if I wanted to actually have camera cuts that were flicking between the characters in the scene, nothing stops me from doing that. So if I added a camera cut track, a shot track, sorry. Oh, so no shots are the thing. I was right the first time. You can't add camera cuts were here, sorry. I can now actually tell it which character I want to load the thing from. So you could even set up some scripting logic that automatically has cameras following certain things. Like I could actually be recording that character, and as it runs around, I could have 10 different cameras on it that were focusing on different aspects of it and doing all sorts of cool stuff. So like I could kind of like, I mean, the example I'd love to give is you could do a car chase and you could be all 10 cars in the car chase. But as well as that, you could also set up another car that was like a chase car that you could then set up your own camera work from and tweak it in post in sequencer. And it would be a pretty negligible thing to get up and running, you know. And if you tell someone I did my car chase through a video game, they're going to go, what? But, you know, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So the question was, can you manually edit the character after the recording by changing keyframes? Yeah, you totally can. So if I was to come into here, I can see that the knights, like I can open up this and I can see all of her transform settings and camera settings and everything else that is set up here. I could either copy them out, or alternatively, you know, I could grab all of these keyframes. Let's say I wanted to get this one. You know, I can examine them in the curve editor, and I could actually grab like, oh, okay, you know, I can see that you are moving in this time. This would obviously be disgusting to have to work with, right? Like if I wanted to have to try and modify these keyframes, that's no fun for anyone. But if I wanted to, there's a great thing in the curve editor that you can use, which is all the way over here, but you can actually choose to get those curves and like run transforms on them and alterations on them. So you can actually set up curve editor filters. So if I wanted to simplify it and hit apply, it will actually reduce the number of keys that were there, and you can tell it how strictly you wanted to adhere to those changes. But that will often make a lot of these things just way more modifiable, because I can say simplify it and have a 0.15 tolerance, apply, and that removed the food. Okay, let's live dangerously. There you go. Okay, 0.3 was way better. So we started to remove some of these keys, and I can choose where I want to alter those and whatnot. But having the power to do that, to me, is like, it just wasn't an option in a lot of other environments. And it's because, you know, this was a game engine first, and then we came along and added film tools into it. So the question is, if the character was just a camera, could you use that method to record a shot navigating through the world using the keyboard as if you were playing as the camera? 100% yes. If you caught the session that I did earlier, not today, yesterday, I did an intro to sequencer last night, where I actually used my iPad as the camera, and I recorded all my camera movements that way. But nothing would stop you from doing the same thing with a Xbox controller or a keyboard and mouse. And the cool thing is you could have two cameras that you were recording simultaneously. You could actually record yourself, and then you could also record another camera, which was a stabilized version of yourself. And you could comfortably use the stabilized version, you know, so that the rotation never kicks out too much. Maybe you're locking in the Dutch so that it's not rolling or anything like that. Maybe, you know, like you want to set up anything like that. You could have some really, really cool setups that are honestly like 2-3 minutes work, and you can suddenly do 50-60 takes of just different things. And maybe you'll discover, and you know, a couple of those things actually feel, you know, grittier than what you planned, or maybe you'll discover some of them have some really cool angles, you know, and retroactively, you know, you could add extra stuff to them as well, because like I was recording those characters as blueprints. I could add extra camera logic to help me set up a, you know, like a dolly along where they were, but avoiding crossovers and stuff like that. You know, like you can set up all sorts of just interesting, crazy stuff. Which controller is better to pair with? Honestly, Xbox and PS4, as long as you can plug the thing in, I believe they both just immediately work out of the box. Like an Xbox controller 100% works out of the box, and I think I've used a PS4 controller on this laptop. I don't think I had any drivers set up for either of them. So it should just work. Like to work a controller, like to add a controller to this setup and have that being something that you're piloting, literally requires you to under project settings, under project settings, under input, you literally say, when I have this move forward, also take the gamepad left thumbstick's y-axis, and move right is going to be my gamepad left x-axis. And Alex, I can hear you clicking around right now.
Sorry.
It's all good. So, you know, we've got these, that is literally all you need to do. And this will now work on an Xbox, a PlayStation, Mad Catz controller, whatever it is that you want to use on that front. It's because Unreal has a generic controller input setup. You don't need to have, you don't actually set up an Xbox controller. It just, you set up controllers. And if I wanted to use the face buttons as jumping or something like that, you know, if I wanted to add jumping logic to this, so I added a jump. You have what's called face button. So if you say face button top, left, right, or bottom, that will then be X, square, triangle, circle, X, or what's the Xbox one? It is A, B, X, Y, I think. I'm losing my gamer cred. So, totally drew a blank on that one. But you know, like so setting that stuff up is pretty straightforward. And yeah, like I know I'm hitting this pretty hard, but I would feel bad if at the end of this everyone had made films in Unreal that were only taking advantage of like render times of 33 milliseconds. Don't get me wrong, that's a great thing to take advantage of, and you totally should. But it would make me feel way better at this whole competition. Is like if at the end of it, I saw filmmakers cut a couple of hours or a couple of days out of their schedule to spend time doing other stuff. And like I think that's a really exciting proposition. Is especially since it's bringing filmmakers into a gaming environment whereby, as game developers, we think of this as how to work with games, but filmmakers are going to approach these as different problems. But because of that, they're going to have more diverse and interesting solutions to things. And it means that I'm sure some of you with these kind of tools will do things that never even occurred to me, and I'll sit there and applaud. So yeah, I'm pretty excited by that aspect of things. Now it's at this point that I wanna switch over to Alex's session, where he's going to be teaching you how to actually build your own little tools and panels that we have here on the right hand side. But just before I do we have any other any other questions that have popped up? Is there a way to connect a PSVR to UE4? Unfortunately, you can't connect PSVR to UE4 without having a Sony development kit. So unfortunately, that one's ruled out. But if you have a Vive or an Oculus or an Index, you can hook them up, and you can use. We actually have a VR editor built in, but unfortunately PSVRs are kind of made to work with PlayStations. Sorry, and one of the was game makers collaborating with filmmakers to do things they never thought to try. Yeah, 100%. Like if game, you know, this is that classic thing of if you get people coming from different backgrounds, they're just going to come up with things that those other backgrounds may not have ever considered, just purely from all the experience that they have, and that's exciting. I can't really comment towards the screen agency's visions inside of things, so I can't really help out too much on that one. But I mean, hopefully, if you give them a demo of even a rough version of some of these things, it might help in explaining your concept. Are the waves a VFX effect? So these waves, funny story. These waves are actually splines. So all they've done to create a coast is they've got a texture that's just moving left and forwards along the material. And if you open up the landscape mode and you look at the splines on it, it actually has a spline mesh. That you can just adjust, which I actually thought was a really cute solution for this whole problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, the latest version of Unreal, like the new one that's coming out, lets you just lay down this stuff and it looks way cooler. But still, it's I think it really seals the effect. To be honest, like I think it's pretty great. Cool. So I think that was it for the core questions on my section. Can you zoom in on the castle? I want to know if they are full modeled or if they don't have back polys. Here's the castle, and here's the castle from here. So they do have some back polys, but I mean it's a cube, so let's be real. Adding those polys there was pretty negligible. You could have done the castle wall as a spline and automatically add turrets along it. In hindsight, that's actually a really good idea, and I might consider doing that. Yeah, this environment's totally acceptable for you to open up. I mean, it's pretty old. This was made before UE4 came out. It was like an early test, so it's still available as a learn sample, but it's seen things. It's been around a while, so it's not always the best example to use, but it may help open up your thinking towards some things. So, Alex, you all ready on your end?
I am ready.
You are ready. Let's do this. Yeah, all right. I'm going to come in on your stream. Cool. Let's do it. I like I like that we're switching from my environment that I just had to yours, and it just got like 10 times gnarlier. Um,
That's a humble brag there, right?
it's just,
Considering
well, I
you
mean,
made it.
I made that one, but it's more of like, it's just,
Yeah,
these are different, definitely different stylistic decisions were employed between
yeah.
these two scenes. That's
I
all.
feel you have generally a grungier
Yeah.
feel to everything you do, right?
Yeah, it's yes. Okay, so
Cool.
go for gold.
On that note, sweet. Hey, folks, I'm Alex. I'm the engineering evangelist here in Australia, and I'm going to show you a couple of tips with scripting in UE. We'll cover a couple of things like covering UMG, which is our UI editor. It's like a what you see is what you get editor. And we'll also cover a bit of editor scripting. So being able to say right click on objects in the background here and then affect them in some way, and also using that UI editor that I mentioned just before to do something in the scene. Super powerful tools. The editor utility blueprints, they're called, they came in about 2 years ago, I think it was, in 4.2.2, 4.2.3. And yeah, super powerful. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So, by popular demand, we've been hearing a couple of people asking for credits. So, this might be a good opportunity to give a little taste of what Unreal Motion Graphics is, our UI editor, and then to show how to integrate this stuff into Sequencer. So, let's start off with creating ourselves a a widget. So we'll right click in the background here, choose blueprints, and then widget. And we'll just call it something like widget BP and credits. Now, the editor here is quite simple. It's very much just a drag and drop system where you can just drag your stuff in, and as long as you format everything, it's pretty easy, right? Now, the key is here. For credits, we'll start off simple. Credits, we can just do something like a text box, right? So, for example, we'll drag in a text box, and we have this thing called anchors, because what we want to do is we want to fill our screen up. And just to note, you can change your screen size through this little drop down here. And you can, this is all scalable depending on what screen you display on. But for most of you, you might be just rendering out to 1080p or 4K or some standard 16:9 shape. Right? In this case, what we want to do is we want to center our text block, right? So in here, we'll zero out all of this, and you can start seeing that we're filling in the entire screen. And then after I've zeroed out all of these, this is just a little quick hack to make sure that we get every centered. We drop here, hit that center button, and we notice this little anchor point is marked in the middle here. You'll see why this is important soon. Now, whenever we add in anything to our UI, we can see our little hierarchy here. So if I dropped in a button or something like that, you can see that show up in the hierarchy. But we'll focus on the text block. Now, credits is usually centered, right? It'd be super unusual to see something left justified, and we'll start putting in our credits. Now, you don't have to use a text block. If you want, you could use what's called a rich text block. It's a little bit more advanced, so I won't show it in this because we don't have much time. But the rich text block lets you do stuff like giving font changes in the one block. So you might have a paragraph that one section is italics, might be bold, might be pink, might be a different color of some type. And you can do that through the rich text block. Now, what I'll do is let's just fill out some text here. So let's call it scripter is Alex Stevens, art is Chris Murphy, hustler is Anthony, not Anthony Reed, and we'll leave that as that. Now, as you can see so far, UMG is quite what you see is what you get. And not only that, not just for building your UIs, but your animations too. So credits, animation. Down the bottom left here, we can create a new animation by hitting this plus button. And then in here, what we're going to do is we'll make sure to select our text box here. We'll add a text track. And up here, what we're going to do is we've got these alignments. And so what we want to do is add our Y alignment, because the Y alignment controls our up and down. So if you've seen Sequencer, the animation timeline in UMG is very similar to Sequencer, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of keyframes. So let's scroll our text box down here. We'll hit the add button and you'll see it show up down the bottom here. And then after, let's say maybe 5 seconds, we'll drag our little slider up here and we'll put in let's scroll that up again, and we'll drop that up there and hit. Now you can see that there is 2 keyframes. How cool is that? So already we can start seeing the beginnings of our credits, right? So now if I hit plus, it eases in, goes up, and eases out. If we wanted to remove that ease in and ease out, you can just right-click each keyframe and click linear. Constant will be like a stepped keyframe, so it'll stay in one place until the next keyframe. And we'll do it to both sides, so it's consistent. And we could also, if we wanted to, we could add in stuff like opacity. So let's see. Add a track. We've got color and opacity, but we'll use render opacity. We could let's drag that because it automatically made me a keyframe. So here's one bit of render opacity. We'll set it to 0. So now it's invisible, right? And then after a little while, let's put in another keyframe and we'll set that to 1. So now, as we scroll in, we can see this nice little effect that just goes up. So there was a question about typography, so font. If you want, there is actually a font option here. So you can import your own fonts and change the materials and stuff like that, change its typeface and its size. And if you obviously want to do different fonts for, say, the credits type, so maybe I'm a scripter and I want that scripter to be italics and then Alex Stevens in bold or something like that. Then you would want to use the rich text block for that. Yeah, cool. I should have totally added Comic Sans. All of the graphic designs out there will be cringing right now. Cool. Now, by default in UMG, animations don't start by themselves. So UMG is usually used for games, so you might be selecting options in a menu, right? So you might be sliding up your graphic settings, and you might have little bouncy animations when you hover over stuff, and all of that is kicked off through blueprints. So what we can do is we can go to the Graph tab just up the top here, and as soon as the widget is constructed, we can then fire off our credits animation. And what we need to do is then add our credits to our scene. So normally in a game, you would have maybe a HUD actor or something of the like that will then instigate that menu element or that widget element, right? So maybe you have a HUD for like ammo and stuff like that. You might even, for your projects, develop it like a little pause and play button, right? Or a fast forward and reverse. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to crack open our sequence that Chris so generously provided me. And what we want to do is somehow add this credits widget to our sequence. However, in Sequencer, there's no actual way to do this. However, we can add an actor. So we're going to do a little bit of a workaround. We'll create ourselves an actor blueprint. We'll call it our BP credits actor. And in here, this is just going to be a little holding actor that allows us to fire off an event. So it'll spawn inside the sequencer, and then it'll create the widget for us. So let's just we'll create a function that we'll call create widget. And then in here, we'll call construct, if I can spell. No, create widget, sorry.
You should be able to just stick this in begin play, right?
We could, but I want to show events.
Sure.
So, for example, so yeah, Chris is right. If we want to, we could do all of this.
It's yeah. I mean, like, there are with the approach that Alex is taking. A cool thing is these credits are actually going to be in the world. Oh, sorry. You could potentially have them in the world, so you could move them using your own transform, just relative to screen space, or we could be playing them in this animation style. So there are a few different solutions for this.
So if you wanted to, you could create a widget component and then assign a widget. Where's the widget class here? Go credits widget. Hopefully it'll show up. Give me a tick. The opacity is down, so it won't be. That's all good. But yes, check out the widget component. You can actually put that physically in the world. And even if you're say recording stuff in VR, you could have like a little widget attached to your arm so that you could play, start and stop, stuff like that. Have your own custom little tools for that stuff. Cool. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create our credits widget, and then we're going to add this to our viewport. And that's it. Now, we've created our actor. We could either drag and drop this into the scene and then go from there, or we can just drag and drop it into our sequence. And in here, we're going to use this sequence or this track for the credits actor to then create the widget. And what we can do is we can create a trigger event. And in here, we'll scrub to somewhere near the end of the actual sequence. We'll hit this little plus button here, or we can hit enter. Right-click that little that key, and then in the event, we can quick bind, and you can see that it's linking to the actual blueprint. And we can find a ton of functions that blueprint fires off or can fire off or call. And what we'll look for is create widget. So you can already see that we've now jumped in, we've created our widget. I'll full screen that for everyone. It'll play our little animation as soon as the widget is constructed. And then when the sequencer gets to a certain time, it'll fire off that event and call this function. And then that kicks off the create credits widget. It adds it to the viewport, and then obviously kicks off this animation. So now what we can do is let's drag this into our scene. I don't think you've got it already in here, do you, Chris? So we'll just let this. I don't think you've added this sequence into the scene already, have you?
No.
Don't think so. Yeah. So let's just
yes, I do.
that.
You can see it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, because it was.
Okay, cool. It's not taking over the camera anyway at the moment, but you'll see the credits come up in a tick. So he'll start doing his little slow down all the animations, and hey, there we go. Now, obviously, that's not optimal. So instead, what you're going to do is generally render from here. We'll capture the movie again. We'll save this. I'll bring over the preview. There we go. So we've got the full movie here. I've got
They're
two
both
running.
playing at the same time.
Yep.
Slightly out of phase.
That's fine. That's because I've got the level sequence already in the level. So I'll take that guy out. It's called entry sequence, right? All right. Entry sequence. Ah, you've got two in there already. Cool. Yeah. Anyway, you get the idea with that. So it's really powerful to just be able to. You can do events like this for anything. So if you want to fire off maybe some kind of physics event, or set off like an explosion that cascades and does some procedural explosion, like maybe you've got a bunch of barrels that just need to fire off, you can use this to then blow them up. And obviously with your UMG, if you want, you can create widgets in the actual 3D environment and have them flying around the world and mixing them with materials and giving them fancy effects and stuff like that. Cool. So that's the end of the a little bit of the intro to credits, because I'm sure that many of you will probably come back to this video and actually check it out. But what we're going to do is something a little bit more for workflow purposes. So in the engine, there's this thing called editor utility blueprints. And what they are is they are special blueprints that can do things to the editor. So you might want to create assets, you might want to start sequencer renders, and programmatically control which shots have been rendered out using blueprints. Or you might want to use editor UI system, UMG, as I just showed you before, and start creating dockable UI windows that sit on the side and do something in the world. And you would do stuff using these to just improve your workflow. So there's a lot of like repetitive stuff, like maybe you want to, for example, we'll show you later on, maybe you want to scatter some objects like these trash bags all over the environment. And you might want to create a script that does this automatically. So let's jump into it. So the first type of editor utility blueprint that I want to show you is a actor utility blueprint. Sorry. So right click, go to editor utilities, select editor utility blueprint, and then scroll down. We've got these asset action utilities. We've got many other little utility blueprint types. Ignore most of them. They usually, if you hover over them, they'll have a description. So don't be scared if you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. But the first one, what we're going to do is we'll grab an actor action utility. And what this is useful for is being able to select an item in the world, and then you'll get this little context menu that shows up that allows you to fire off your own blueprint functions. So after we've created this editor utility blueprint, what we're going to do is add a custom event. We'll call it select assets. And then we're going to tick off this little colon editor. And we're not going to do anything just yet because I want to show you why I've set it up like this. As soon as we hit that colon editor, it will show up this scripted actions menu. And whenever I click this, it'll fire off this event that's just here. So to show this, I can just do a print string. And like any programmer starts off, we'll do hello world. So now what I can do is right click, scripted actions, selected assets, and now I print hello world, right? So immediately you can start saying, oh, maybe I need to do something to this actor. Maybe I want to duplicate it. Maybe I want to do some kind of complex operation that I've done a million times before. And maybe I just want to automate it, right? So in our case, what we want to do is I want to create a utility that's technically already in the engine, but just for the sake of the purposes of going along and showing you how to do things, this is going to be a good example. But we're going to do something like the select all utility. So for example, if I select a decal and I go select all or control, it's select all decal actors, control shift A. It'll select all of the decal actors in the scene, right? And same thing goes with sequences. If I do control shift A, it'll select all of the sequences in the scene. So we're going to implement the same functionality, but we'll add a little bit to it later on. So what we're going to do is we'll do get all level actors. Oops, sorry, get all selected level actors, I should say. And this returns us a list of actors. Now, in UE, we call lists arrays. If you've done any programming, it's very similar to everywhere else. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this list of actors that we've selected, there is something in that list, because it could return us a list with nothing in it. So it's of length 0, right? Now, let's get the first one. And what we're going to do is we'll just print its name for now. So we'll do another print string. We'll get the very first one that we've selected and we'll print it. So we'll go back in. I'll select this decal, right click, scripted actions, select assets. You can see it called asphalt crack something. So 000 inst 3. But if I select multiple objects, then it'll still print that first one because it was the very first one that was selected, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use that very first one. And remember, Chris mentioned that us programmers count from 0, not from 1, from 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to, yeah, I know, right? So it was when I first started learning programming, it sent me around the bends, right? I was just, confused as all hell when I first heard that, because you always count from like 1, 2, 3, right? No, in programming, it's always from 0. But anyway, so we want to get the type of that first selected actor, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to get all actors of class. And what this is going to do is it will provide us a list of actors that match that same first actor's type. We'll initially do a for each loop. Actually, even better, I'll just go straight for it. We'll then get it to set and select level actors from that list, right? So as soon as we've selected one, we execute that, the scripted action, and then it fires off, it gets the first type, it finds all actors of that type, and then it selects them. Now you may have noticed that there's this little pin. As soon as I compile, it throws up an error. It asks for a world context object. Now, I mentioned before that there's blueprints that are of editor type, so editor utility blueprints, and then there's normal blueprints. Now, the difference between them is editor scope and game scope. Now, yep, cool. So editor scope and game scope. Now, game scope means that if we're at runtime, if we're playing the game, so we've hit this play and editor button, right? It'll return us the current physically simulating world, right? But in editor utility blueprints, we have this special one, which is editor world. And that just gives us literally the world that's being previewed right now. It's don't worry too much about it. Just understand that whenever you're in a editor utility blueprint, you probably want to use get editor world. Now, we can hit compile. Now we've got no more errors, and we can give that a crack. So like Control-Shift-A, which selects all of the decal actors, let's use our scripted action, and we'll select assets. Hey, how cool is that, right? So, but it's very redundant. We've already got something like this, right? It's already built into the engine. So what we're going to instead do is we are going to iterate through that list of actors, and we're going to filter based on where our camera is looking. So we'll only select all of the actors of that first selected type, and then grab all the ones that we can see directly in front of our camera. So what we're going to do is we will grab our section of nodes here, and we're going to do a little convenience thing because I want to keep this functionality, but I just want to reuse it for later, right? And then apply my little filter on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to collapse all of these nodes to a function. And we're going to call this function get selected assets of type. And we'll uncheck this because we don't want it to show up in our scripted actions. We just want to reuse it, right? However, what we're going to do is we're going to add selected, actually, first off, we're going to create a second function that we will expose to the scripted actions. So get or select actors in view. Notice that this is checked automatically. So when you do add a function through here, that's already checked for you. We'll compile that. We'll recall this function, which will return us all of the selected actors that we've already initially clicked on, right? And what we're going to do is we'll promote this to, actually, no. We will iterate through. So if you know what a loop is, essentially a loop will go through this array or the list one by one. So the first element, it returns something. Second element, it returns something. Third element, it returns another, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to get that element's location. And then we're going to check in front of us whether or not they are there. So we've got this special little function called get viewport, get viewport camera info. And just to prove actually that this is here, I will create a, so draw viewport direction. We'll fire this off. This is just a little draw debug error. You'll see what it does in a tick. Editor world. Once again, you see this little context object, right? We'll draw our from the camera's location, and we'll then also get our forward vector. Might be a good chance for Chris to explain what vectors are, if he hasn't already.
My time to shine.
Hey.
I mean, I kept using the phrase vector before, but you're right, I didn't explain it. I'll switch to this one. Yeah, for anyone that wants to know how it works is if you think of X direction, Y direction, and Z. So X, Y, Z as like the ways you can move throughout the world. A forward vector just means if I'm pointing along the x-axis, it would give me a value of 1, 0, 0, which means I'm facing down the x-axis. If I'm pointing down the y, it would be 0, 1, 0. If I'm facing upwards, 0, 0, 1. In a situation like this, you know, if you were pointing in between those two, it would be a value of like 0.5, 0.5, 0, because we're facing perfectly diagonal. So we use this coordinate system as just a way of kind of, it's devoid of rotation. It's purely about the facing of something. And yeah, that's what I was using before when I said get actor forward vector. I was saying which way is the actor facing, which way is its rightwards facing, etc., etc.
Yeah. So in our case, what I've done is in Wii you can draw little debug lines, and they're super handy. You use them. I use them for everything, actually. Like if I go, oh no, I can't figure out what's going wrong, debug lines or debug arrows or spheres or points or whatever, and it really helps you figure out, okay, what's going wrong. But in this case, it's a good tool to show you that, oh, I've created this little scripted action called draw viewport direction. You can see that little red line, but that's the original location and heading that the camera is looking towards, right? So this, as Chris said, the get forward vector is the heading of the camera. It's pretty handy. So we're going to use this get level viewport camera info and a little bit of trigonometry to then calculate, okay, what's the vector towards, I keep forgetting this one, unit vector towards, get unit direction. So we're going to go from our viewport camera info to the actor location. And that's going to get the direction or the heading from the camera to that point, right? So for example, I'm just going to use some random props, right? So maybe you've got the camera and you've got an object over here, and the heading is pointing this way, but then the camera is pointing this way. So the two vectors, we can calculate the angle between those two vectors and then say, is this less than the field of view? And if it is, cool, let's select it. If it isn't, oh well, like let's just ignore it, right? So what we're doing in this case is we're going to do another get forward vector, and we're going to do this magic little operator called a dot product. Now this gives what's called the scalar angle. Now don't be too scared about me using a bit of math terminology right now, but just understand that if we use a cos degrees on this guy, it turns that dot product scalar angle into the degrees difference.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
Can we use the flag recently rendered to just see?
Ooh.
That only just occurred to me.
Maybe.
We might be able to just ask. We might be able to just say,
Holy
are
hell.
you on screen right now?
Chris, you must be a genius.
Sorry, we're going into all this math for this, and it just occurred to me we may be able to just say, are you on screen?
This is why it's not always the best thing to go to a programmer, because we might just engineer the hell out of something, right?
Alex is doing it the right way, but it occurred to me that this might work.
Yeah.
Let's just do a really quick test.
Let's give it a crack, because I know this works at runtime, but I don't know if it's going to work at editor time, which I think it will, because it runs under the same path.
That's really funny.
But,
it's worth noting that for this, like, either way, like the important part of this was not to show you how to build this exact tool. I mean, this tool is something we're whipping up. The point of this was to show you that you can create your own tools, and if you have someone that's keen on scripting, they can get under the hood without having to kind of get dirty with C++ code. So you can kind of whip up the right tools that are right for your kind of project, and they're going to help you kind of get the actors working in the way that you want them to.
Yeah. So let's give this a crack. So what I've done is I've essentially created a local variable, which is another list, because what I want to do is I want to iterate over the current selected actors, or the selected actors of type, and then go, has this recently been rendered? So if it shows up in our camera, then we know it's in our view, right? We could trust the engine for the most part. And then what we're going to do is, if that has been rendered is added it to another list, which then we'll use to select at the end. So we can pass in those actors that are currently being rendered into the selection. So let's hit compile and hold on to our butts. So we'll select this again, scripted actions, select actors in view, and hey, I think that's worked because those are a couple there. Hey, well, I'm going to use that from now on. Thank you, Chris.
Wonderful. Sorry, as you're doing it, I was like, surely this is a solved problem.
Yeah. Cool. So selected actors in view, you can see that these are the only two that have been selected, whereas the ones behind us haven't. So that's pretty handy, right? Now, what happens if we wanted to do something like, let's grab this trash bag or a couple of things. We could potentially do a custom event. Let's call it an editor. We'll scatter it. Let's call it scatter. I did tick up that. Yeah, there we go. We'll get all of our selected level actors, iterate through them. So we'll go through a little bit quicker. I'm not as quick as Chris because my FPS skills are not elite like his. Let's do add world offset. Yeah. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add some random unit vector, right? And we'll multiply that by some random distance. So what we're going to do is we're just going to scatter it in a random location. We might even, let's leave sweep off for now because I'm going to leave that for some fancy fancy stuff later on. And we're going to make it actually I'll do a random floating range. So it might move from maybe 10 centimeters to 100 centimeters random direction, right? So we'll jump in, we'll do the scripted action of scatter, and you can see that it's just quickly, it just shifts in one random direction. However, maybe we want to scatter this in a direction where we configure all of these options, right? So there's multiple ways that we can do this. We could kind of add in a what's called an editor utility actor and have that control everything if we want. It's not the most neat thing to do because then you got to drag an actor in there and configure it there and then find that actor using your scatter script and yada yada yada. But it sounds complicated, right? But instead, what we can do is we could do something like a editor utility widget, which means that we can do something similar to what I just showed, except we'll start creating a little UI to make it a little bit prettier and a little bit more configurable so we can dial back little dials and knobs, right? So let's create an editor utility widget like so. Editor utility widget BP. We'll call it a scatter. And in here, it looks super familiar, right? It's same thing as before. It's just UMG, except now we are in editor land. Now, the cool thing about this is that we can start adding stuff like buttons that give us functionality. So maybe we want to create a button that shows us the FPS, just like little shortcuts, right? I'll give this guy some padding, text. We'll call it toggle FPS. And this button will show up on a little widget that will show up like so. So if we right-click this blueprint, we can hit Run Editor Utility widget, and now you can see this button here, right? But now we need to give it functionality. And like before, we could go to the widget graph and then create some functionality for that button. So If we want, we can select the button here and go down and click events, or we can go back to the designer and select the button here and scroll down here. Looks the same, right? We'll choose on pressed. And in here, what we can do is execute a console command. And this is a really commonly used console command in Unreal Engine. It's called stat FPS. You can bring up the console normally when you're running a game, or even in editor by hitting the tilde button, which is the little squiggly line just below the escape button. And you could do stat FPS in there, or many other commands like being able to change the renderer settings and stuff like that of the engine. Super handy. You've probably seen this in the old UT games if you've ever played them as well. Cool. So now we've got this on press button. We'll go back to the toggle FPS. We'll click. You can see, hey, my FPS is showing up. We'll hit it again. It toggles it. How cool is that, right? Now, we're going to repurpose this. We'll scrap what we've just done. And we'll create our little scatter function, again using our widget, right? So we'll call this guy scatter. And what we're going to do is we're going to start adding a couple of variables that allow us to control the scatter strength and the angle. Because what I want to do is might have an object, right? And optimally, we want to just say scatter in a particular direction. And imagine that this scatter operation is actually going to have it kind of simulate the physics of it moving in arcs, right? So you might have that fly around and hit another object and it'll just stop in mid-space. And what we want to do is provide a velocity. So it's almost like you're tossing it, right, in one direction until it lands on something. And the engine has this functionality to predict projectile paths, right? So let's abuse that. So firstly, we're going to create a variable called max velocity. And we'll also create another variable called max angle, because we're going to randomize the angle in a conal fashion. And it'll fly up somewhere or in a random direction, depending on the max angle, which is 90 degrees, because a cone can obviously only be 90 degrees from the dead center, right? But not only that, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to control these variables from our widget. So under the palette here, we've got this single property view. What we can do is we can drag that into our vertical box. We'll put it above our scatter functionality, if I can get it there. Here we go. And you'll notice that there's this undefined object. What we need to do is we need to tell that widget in particular, hey, this is the object that we're going to read this property from. The object being our widget, right? The running widget that's currently running. We'll call this prop view max velocity. We'll give it a property name called max velocity. And then in our graph, we're going to go to our pre-construct method. Now, this is important for this property view function or property view widget. Construct happens just as the UI is getting constructed, and pre-construct runs just before. So you can think of construct is begin play, and pre-construct is just before begin play, right? In this case, what we're going to do is do set object, and we're going to specify our self. So once our widget has been spawned into editor land, we call ourselves self, right? So we've set that, and as soon as we hit compile, you'll see that this undefined object will now show up as max velocity, because what it's doing is it's looking for a property called max velocity on the object of ourselves And so it's finding this max velocity and going, oh, cool, okay, let's use that. So now from here, what we can do is we can set a default velocity of 500 unreal units per second, which is 500 centimeters per second or 5 meters per second. And then in the designer, we can start saying, oh, cool, our default max velocity is now 500, right? And we can do the same for our max angle, right? So we'll put in, damn, I just deleted it, didn't I? There we go. We'll call this max angle. We'll rename this prop view max angles so we can tell what we're working with. Go back to the graph. We've got this undefined object because obviously we haven't set the object yet. And now most people at this stage would normally go and duplicate this and have another target set, which is our max angle property, and we'll start doing select self again. However, it's a little known fact, but you can actually just drag this here. And it'll treat, Blueprints will treat this as kind of like a little, hey, oh, you've got multiple inputs for the target. Let's run this function with self as an input on each of these inputs, right? Each of these targets. And it's just a little convenience function. So now we've compiled. We've got our max velocity and angle. We've got a scatter function. So let's now start creating our scatter. And you can see this showing up in our little dockable window, I should say. So we can drag that around. We can put it up next to our toolbars here, or even at the top of our viewport. It's pretty handy. You can start seeing the potential power of this. If you wanted to start developing your own virtual production tools and releasing these to the marketplace, you could do it all through Blueprints, right? Not a line of code required. Noting that, though, you can totally write Python in Unreal Engine. This is something that I totally forgot to tell everyone last time, but it's pretty cool. Maybe we should do a Python tutorial at some point. Maybe, if there's demand. Cool. So let's do our scatter function. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the same get selected level actors like before. And what we're going to do is for each selected actor, we will do something. So in this case, what we're going to do is we'll do let's start drawing some functionality. Let's do that functionality of a predict projectile path, and we'll do by a trace channel. And trace channels are, for lack of a better word, they're like, imagine you want to ignore glass because you want to see something through that glass. You would have that as not visible, or you might have players or pawns in the world be ignored by different collision. In our case, what we're doing is we're just wanting to check, do we hit something that is visible in the world? So what we'll do is we'll go through, we'll predict a projectile path. We'll get our initial actor location, which will be our start position. Now, I mentioned before that you can do get editor world, right, for this. But if you already have an actor that you're providing, or that you have, or you're touching in some way, you can just use that as the world context object, because it'll provide the world automatically for you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a launch velocity where we get a random unit vector from a cone, right? And we'll put that in the vector up direction. So that's going to be x, y, z is 0, 0, 1, so directly up. And then we're going to provide our max angle in the cone half angle. Now, something that I forgot to say is we can actually set min and max ranges for our angles. As you probably heard me say before, the cone can only be a maximum of 90 degrees, right? So let's go to the slider range. We'll make sure that it only works between the 0 mark and the 90 mark. Now when I compile, I'll scroll this up, and you can see that little scroller bar can be capped. So now we're stuck at 90 degrees. We can also, I'll set, just so it's easier for me, I'll set that to 60 degrees by default. I'll make it super easy. And let's see what this looks like, right? So we'll go through our path positions. Now, what I want to do is I want to draw a line between each of these, this ballistic path. So I didn't exactly explain what the projectile path is, but imagine you start off at a position and you say, I want to launch something at this velocity. It will then calculate the gravity impacted on that object and then have it do an arc until it finally hits something. But what we also want to do is we want to have it ignore all of the other actors that are about to be moved and scattered as well, because we may not necessarily want them to be hit. If we want, we could also put in a radius, so we could use something like the actor bounds here, and then get the max element like that and pass that in as the projectile radius. But I find that's not always the most important thing to do. I'll show you what my workaround for that is instead, because I'll use actual collision. So what we want to do is draw out that path. So it flies out, it sends a little debug line to show us what the arc is going to look like. So instead of doing a normal for each loop, we'll do just a plain for loop. We'll get the last index, we'll pump that guy in, and we'll start from 1. Because what we want to do is we want to get the line between path position 0 and 1, then 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, 3 and 4, so on and so forth. So in here, we're going to say get the end point and the start point, which is 1 behind us, right? I'll drag this just over here. Now, a cool little thing that you can do is you can double click along a little like a bit of spaghetti there, I'll just call it that, between your pins. And you can create a reroute node. This is super handy to just make your stuff look a little bit nicer, right? We'll drag that in. Now what we can do is we've got our a start. So you can add comments as well if you've got other people working on blueprints with you. You can hover over and add in comments on a per node basis, or you could even right click and then click comment. You can do add comment to selection, or a shortcut is hold C, is it, Chris? Yeah, there we go. So get line or get segment. There you go. You can also change the color of it and stuff like that. So if you want people to notice it, it's going to be pretty damn obvious like that, right? And the cool thing is that as soon as you comment a couple of nodes, you can move them around. So super handy. All right, let's delete that. We'll draw a debug line. Once again, we have a world context object, can be using the actor that we're throwing around. I'll create that as just a orange, and we'll give it a duration of 5 and thickness of 3. Cool. So now remember, we're going through all of our selected actors. We toss it in a random direction, and then we go through each of those resultant positions and we draw a line. And so when I hit scatter, we can see that it flies around like this. So that's probably not staying, it doesn't have a full-on velocity. I've totally forgotten to multiply this out, haven't I? Yes, I have. What we can do is we can multiply our up vector. Actually, apologies. We'll multiply our unit vector in a random direction, and we'll give it a max velocity, like so. We could do it in a random amount, but we'll just leave it as 500 for now. So if we scatter, now you can see the direction where it's going to go. So it doesn't go through the pylon because of its trace channel, right? And each time we hit scatter, we've got a new point. Cool. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to place it, right? So instead of doing our draw debug line, what I'll do is we'll leave that, but we'll also update the position of that actor. And that actor, when I update its position, I can set set world location. Set actor location. Sorry. Just had a bit of a brain fart there. And what we can do is we can say, okay, let's set our endpoint and we'll sweep. Now, what sweeping is, now I almost need 3 arms for this, right? What sweeping is imagine you've got this actor and we go, hey, I want to move from here to here. If we sweep that actor, it will initiate the collision as well. So it will go and it'll move that collision along until it hits something, and then it'll stop. And why this is useful in this case is because the bin or the garbage bag has a bit of collision that's around it that looks like this, right? So if I was using the projectile radius might be way bigger than the bag, right? So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to update the position of that bag and also use its collision to collide stuff. So it only uses its tightest little collision as possible and can get into smaller little nooks and crannies, right? So now that we've done that, we have our little scatter function, right? So you can see that it's bounced across, it's hit the wall just over here. If I wanted to, I could also draw the hit location. So once again, draw debug point. I will put in the, I should really create a reroute node for this, but we'll do an impact point. We'll give it a size 10, hit the point color, and let's try that again. We'll hit scatter. Yep. So we've potentially hit something just here, have we? I'll move this out of the way. There we go. Oh, it's not showing the hit point. Give me a tick. Maybe it's, that's probably why. Okay. It's probably...
Your duration is 0.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that it only draws on a blocking hit. So a blocking hit is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically, has my collision hit anything or has my sweep hit anything? And yeah, we hit scatter. we can see that there's a little red dot just underneath that. That's exactly where that little point hit. And that's a great way to figure out what's going wrong, right? Or going on. So let's do this. So we can now select multiple objects, or actually we can use a combination of our scripted actions. So I can select actors in view. They're all static meshes anyway, but it worked, right? So let's select actors in view. Let's just select the ones that we've got here. We'll scatter, and they've shifted around. It's a neat little way just to quickly move them and have them walk up walls and stuff like that. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could also filter this out by checking the impact normal and using that little bit of dot product math that I mentioned before. And you can use that to say, hey, am I hitting a surface that's flat and underneath me, right? And that could be a cool way to filter out whether or not you've got a valid result. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So do we have any questions, actually?
Cool. I'll bring it back to the questions for all of us while we're kind of working through that bit, actually. So, I know Tony had to shoot off briefly, so I'm not sure if he's back. Guess we'll find out. Can I get you to kill your stream as well?
Oh, yes. Yes, I will.
Okay, yeah. No Tony at the moment, but that's okay. All right, so, oh, and I should turn on my camera. Yay.
Yeah, I don't want to be lonely.
All right. At some point during this presentation, you ended up with the hot chocolate, and I don't know how this happened. Yeah, time for Q&A. We've got 3 of these sessions left for everybody, for the core training ones. So, please try and get in and ask any questions that you may have. Let's try and put some fires out before they even start, I guess. If there's anything you want to know on the technical side with Alex and I, we'll do our best to answer. But then again, we also have sorry, I read the chat. Distracting.
I swear it's really
but then again, we also have yeah, you do kind of look like a toddler drinking out of an adult cup right now. So yeah, by all means, let us know if there's anything you're curious about. We'll do our best. We have two sessions. Creative Frame has asked about binding keys to values. So binding keys to values is if you're looking to bind something as an input. That was kind of something that we covered in my section of the presentation. But if you wanted to know how to potentially have if we wanted to have this character such that we were able to jump, and I was going to bind a key that was to make her jump higher, which you could do the same thing if you were to set up your own virtual camera. You could then have a key to adjust focus or something like that. To get the input working, you would bind spacebar to jump. And in the character, you would say... It's going to look really weird, by the way, but that's okay. You're going to bind jump to jump. I haven't actually set up the jump animation. However, if we wanted to have such that the R and T keys, or up and down arrows or something like that, were used to change the jump height, I could do the same thing by going back to my project settings, and I could have an input that said... let's bind another key that is to increase, and this again would be the same as your focal length or whatever it is that you wanted to do. We could have increase jump, and I'm gonna have decrease jump, which will be down. And literally all I would need to do for something like that is just say, hey, whenever they press up, oh sorry, not up, whenever they press increase jump, I would find their max jump height, and I would set...
it'd be a good time to say try using input actions and axes as much as possible instead of the direct key bindings,
Yeah.
because then that way you can bind
It's easy to
any
control.
type of control.
Yeah, sorry, I want to get the jump Z. Oops, I just did a get. Sorry, folks, I'm a little tired. Get jump Z velocity. So I'll just add 50 to it every time. Let's add 100 so it's noticeable. And I could do the same logic for something like that, except instead of increase jump, it would be decrease jump, and the jump Z velocity would, let's just say, negative 100. Now, obviously, I have no safeties on this at all, so I could technically jump negative amounts. Regular jump does this now. I hit up a few times, and now we're able to do this. But if I was hit down a few times, there's little tiny baby jumps, and it would work that way. Cool.
Should also be known as well is that you could also use, I'm going to drop a link to this, but the web control plugin, which if you're savvy with web scripting and stuff like that, you can tell the engine what to do from a web page, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so this is definitely a useful one. So what Alex is linking to is if you were doing some virtual production that was like on set, you can actually bind editor controls and things like that to be purely built into like a web page that's just like a singular control panel that might have like a slider for time of day. Or it might have a change environment button on it or something. So that way you can kind of give that to, excuse me, hiccups. You could give that to your DP or something, and they could make the adjustments without having to know how to use Unreal. So that's useful for those kind of situations.
Neil asks, is that scripting GUI linked to a known language such as Python?
And then, Luke Harris's question was following on from that. Do you have Python running that you could do a 10-second hello
yes.
world by any chance?
I actually could.
Do you want to get that up and just step through it instead of showing them how to build it? We'll just show them those steps maybe.
Sure.
It's okay. It's all right. It's part of the job. This is what I get for deciding that the best way to run this was evening sessions and afternoon sessions to try and account for everybody who may have jobs or who may be doing this as a hobby. So I was like, we want to cater to both groups who might be watching this professionally, and then cater to groups that are going to be watching it in their spare time. It didn't occur to me at the time that meant that I would be running the 2 sessions a day. So I need the hot chocolate.
It's actually a chai latte.
Chai latte, my mistake.
Hey.
Maybe it was stupid, but is there a fun example of what basic export settings may look like for the final product? That's a really good question. I don't think we have any out of the box for the new editor export. The new media export tool, purely because the media export tool isn't officially out. I think it's considered experimental at the moment. So I don't think we have anything there, but if you want to have a conversation about that, bring it up in the Discord, and I'm happy to kind of reference. I can ping some of the internal teams and see if they have any settings that were used on some of their stuff for their best results, and I'll do my best to reach that out. If I can get hold of that information, I'll put it into the FAQ of the PDF file that everyone goes to whenever you're getting the next link. By the way, once again, thank you everyone for adapting to that strange system. We legit had a learning system all built and set up 3 days before this presentation. We unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, fortunately had substantially higher numbers than expected. So all of our organization went out the window, and we had to adjust to a system that would support way more viewers at 60 FPS, which kind of had to be YouTube.
Ooh, am I live now?
Sorry, you're live.
Okay, your mic was muted, so I was like, oh, what's going on? Cool, yeah, so Neil, just for you, there people were wondering, was there Python support in Unreal Engine? And here to say, yes, there is. For example, in Unreal Engine, if you wanted to, you can create inside your content folder, a Python folder. And in here, you could do an init Unreal script, which is similar to the init script for Python. Or you could even just put in your own script. So for example, this hello world, all it does is it prints a log. You could also just do print hello world. Now I can't remember if this is Python 3 or 2.7. I always get confused by them. But you can see I can, down the bottom here, instead of CMD in the output log, I can select Python and then just type in test_script .py, right? And it'll print my hello worlds. I could also, for example, start creating, this is something that I was playing around with earlier today. I can start creating functions that are exposed to blueprints. So for example, I've got this create actor template asset. And in here, I can go in and call create actor template asset. So this is actually a Python command that is now exposed to blueprints, which is pretty damn cool, right? So now you can start scripting in Python and giving your designers who don't know Python access to even more functionality. And the cool thing about Python and UE4 is that it has a little bit more API access than Blueprints itself. You can also obviously do your normal functionality like import sys or import OS, right? And doing more operating system specific stuff. And setting up pipelines and stuff like that. I've seen people using Python to spin up and start doing sequencer renders and stuff like that, creating assets, importing JSON. I did a little demo for another company to do what's called a data validation system in Python, and super powerful, super powerful.
So one thing that's worth noting for Python is we generally encourage it to only be used as an editor side of things. So you don't want to run Python during games. It's just too slow.
Yep.
So you kind of use it for these editor tools and import scripts and configurations and those kind of things. But it's not something you would be calling like on tick or something in an actor.
Yeah. So and it should be noted that Python is actually only editor only. It doesn't run when you build a game, but it probably doesn't apply to the majority of you anyway, because you'll only be working in editor anyway.
Yeah. That said, there's a pretty good chance that many of you have Python scripts for your various DCCs that may be able to be potentially ported over. So you could be able to just bring over some of those tools out of the box, which would be a nice head start for some of you. Do we have any other questions?
I'll link an article by Joe Graff.
Oh yeah.
He actually does a little script in Python that cracks open Maya for you. Just with you can make a little editor utility widget like I did before, and just hit open Maya, and you can work completely from UE. Just spin it up. I think you could potentially. No, I won't speculate on that, but. Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with your pipeline just using Python. Cool. So check it out.
Okay, it looks like nothing else is really popping up. We kind of went through the bulk of it, I think, during this during the talk itself, because I mean the two of us were able to answer each other's questions for the most part. So I'd say that's about it. We'll release everybody, and you can all go back to your evenings. So, look, thank you all very much for attending once again. It's been really lovely to see. There's a lot of folks coming, but there's also certain familiar faces that are kind of popping up. So I'm really excited to see everyone's projects. One thing I just want to stress is if you didn't want to, so Alex, switch the stream off. If you didn't want to. If you didn't want to bring up anything here, I totally understand. Public forums is sometimes daunting to raise questions or something's just not the right place. So please feel free to reach out to the SFC-ANZ at Epic Games email address and we can answer things there. Alternatively, Alex and I are lingering around the Epic Games Oceanic Discord, which, while community run, it's a pretty useful spot. So, we're happy to have some conversations with folks there. And, if you've got some work that you've got and you're after some feedback on it and you want to have a bit of a discussion, please let us know. We're more than happy to give you some pointers. Like, if you've got a scene and you're like, here's what I've got so far, I'm happy to point at it and be like, look, this is lovely, but turn this setting on, turn this setting on, turn this setting on, turn this setting off. And, like, it's not as a criticism by any means. It's just we've been through this before, and I've hit those same roadblocks before. And if someone had have told me, pretty early on in the piece that one setting was going to save me 3 days of hitting my head against lighting, then I would have turned it on. Happy to give our best advice, especially also, just generally leading up to the submission. I know some of you want to do some kind of viability checks on your projects. Just, is this achievable? Or if you want to have a conversation about, what resources exist, because I can see that I can do A, B, D, and F, but I have no idea how to approach B, C, and E. Alex and I are happy to point you towards resources that we think might be a good starting point for those things. Is there a good way to share screens without uploading large amounts of data? Share scenes without uploading large amounts of data. Kind of depends what you're sharing. Like, you're probably always going to have that one-time distribution for some things. Unfortunately, if you're both working on, like, if you and a partner are working on 8K textures, you're going to be submitting 8K textures and such. Like, so it can be a little bit tricky. Unfortunately, that's just something you've just got to kind of get a bit more accustomed to. Like, while in film, you'll be pushing out your each pass, and then you'll be working on what you've got. In our situation, you've got those raw assets, which sometimes is much smaller, but sometimes is much bigger. It all depends on the kind of project you're building.
Yeah, and it should be noted that I often see the mistake that if people start using source control, they also commit certain folders that are in the project that you just really don't need to commit, like the saved folder and the intermediate folder if you're doing a C++ project. Actually, shall I screen share, get ready, Chris? I can just share one.
Sure. What are we doing?
I'm just showing, say, a folder. So, for example, we might have...
Okay, as long as it's a project that can definitely be screen shared.
Yeah. It's
cool.
It's just
I'll click the button. I'll trust you.
So, for example, if you're doing a project that's contents only, if you're going to submit that to Perforce or SVN or a version control system, only submit these. Ignore the intermediate, ignore the saved, ignore the derived data cache if it's there, because the saved folder is actually quite large.
All your autosaves.
It contains cooked data if you've cooked your game, and the derived data cache as well, if it is there, can sometimes be gigabytes. So the main ones, that's just 1.02 gigabyte, and it's auto-generated on startup, right? So whereas the main ones are naturally these, and maybe not even that. You could just do the new project in the content and config folder. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. It sounds like we're probably done for the questions and an easy round, I guess. So if you want to work with proper project sharing, this is actually something that we should consider running a session on, which is just setting up some source control. Yeah. But like, Unreal does have integrated source control if you want to use Subversion or Perforce or Git to pretty easily transfer only the small changes in your projects. So, if one person's working on just the map and they didn't touch anything else, you can comfortably just send just the map file to everyone else with one click from your content, 2 clicks from your content browser to send it to folks. So we probably should do an extra session for that one, but that is one that can potentially wait until after the pitches, I suspect, because it's not it's relevant for development, but it's not necessarily relevant for your prototyping and exploratory phase, which you have like right now, I guess. So, yeah. Anyway, look, thank you very much for coming, everybody. I know some of you have had to deal with my voice now for 8 separate days in 2 weeks, but it's always a bit of fun as well. So look, I'm looking forward to seeing you all, or some of you, for the 2 sessions we have tomorrow. We have Intro to Visual Effects in the afternoon, and then we have Intro to Tech Art in the evening. I've added a little bit to the Tech Art session on account of some of the feedback from here with regards to just doing some post-processing passes, so we can do some more like toon-looking visuals and things like that. But yeah, thank you all very much for your time, and have a good evening. Take care.
Cool. Thanks, folks.
Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now.